Great.
Just starting now.
Thank you, everyone, and a warm welcome to this eHealth Learning podcast, where we encourage the sharing of knowledge and the support that brings. Thank you for joining us for our conversation today, titled Attention to Sensory Perception, with our guest this evening, Andrew Cook, a long-serving craniosacral therapist and teacher. Thank you for joining us again, Andrew. Andrew has contributed to our programme, so do go back to the archives and check out his other offerings if you haven't already done so. These are available on our website, ehealthlearning.tv. We will be putting Andrew's details up. They should be in the chat box already, so do visit his website. It's a great resource where he provides useful information, courses and workshops. If you have any questions for Andrew that do arise during this conversation, please put them up in the chat, and we will make some time at the end of the session to answer these towards the end. Okay, great. All that being said, welcome, Andrew. Thanks for being here. How are you today?
Yes, good. Thanks, Natalie. Yes.
Fantastic, fantastic. Right, so I believe you've got a talk for us, so I'm just going to hand it over to you. If there's anything you need, you let me know.
Okay, thank you. Cup of tea would be nice.
You have my full attention.
Of course.
Good.
Okay. All right, maybe I need to pin myself or something. There we go. That's better. Then I can see what's going on. There we are. Okay, so hello everyone. Yes, welcome to this little talk. I'll be talking for, I guess, about 45 minutes or something like that, and then there'll be time for questions at the end, or something along those lines. And yes, and this is a talk about the senses and how we perceive things, how we pay attention, and it's something of, well, I mean, it's fundamental to how not just humans navigate the world, but how every living thing navigates the world. So I started to look at this sort of indirectly when I started practicing craniosacral therapy, because CST is fundamentally about how you direct attention in all kinds of different ways. There's all sorts of subtleties about how attention is directed in the practice of CST, but it particularly came of let's say more conscious and direct interest when I started working with trauma. And so I've been practicing CST now about almost 30 years. After I'd been doing it for, I don't know, probably less than 10 years, I realized that a lot of people coming into my practice with physical issues of all kinds, actually, it was an embodiment problem that if not the main thing, at least that was a component of what was going on. And you can then retranslate that as embodiment is essentially another way of saying, if it's an embodiment issue, it's another way of saying there's dissociation of some sort. So I realized actually what I was working with was some level of trauma, even though most people didn't kind of consider themselves to have that as an issue. And so I went and did a little bit of training with the Sensorimotor Psychotherapy Institute. It's a slightly different approach from somatic experiencing. It was basically an introductory level course for all kinds of different people. There were psychiatrists on there, all sorts of counselors and psychologists. I was the only bodywork practitioner, although the SPI in the States where they're based actually do bodywork courses specifically for body workers. Anyway, there was a lot of emphasis, of course, polyvagal theory. So this, I'm going back now almost 20 years. So polyvagal theory was still kind of a bit of a new kid on the block, and it was sort of starting to be sort of the main thing people used, and so I came home, and this was taught from a psychotherapy point of view, and I saw myself as a body worker. I didn't want to go the psychotherapy route. A lot of body workers who've followed this route have actually ended up practicing as psychotherapists, and I kind of didn't want to do that. So I thought, okay, how do I modify this so that I can use it within a bodywork practice for people who don't see themselves as being traumatized? You know, they're not coming in for trauma, they're coming in for they've got a bad neck after a car crash, or you know, whatever, all sorts of different things. It's a woman who's had a difficult birth. Okay, so there's been things happen during the birthing process. And there's all sorts of conditions where the shock retained in the body, which is not that obvious unless you've got an eye to see it. So the question was, how do I work with these people? They've come for body work, not psychotherapy. How do we work with them? And so I started to actually teach them something quite simple, which is called the window of tolerance, which is basically it's one part of the whole description of how the body works. And so the window of tolerance, a lot of you listening are probably familiar with it. I can't see anybody's faces at all, but anyway, so basically you can divide the whole of human experience into 3 zones. There's kind of a middle zone of normality, where we're 3-dimensional human beings, or not just 3-dimensional, we're multi-dimensional human beings. We've got access to all kinds of possible experiences. And then this window of tolerance, I've taught this and then more times than I can remember over a period of 20 years, and I've come to realize actually it's not actually. It's a lot of people take it to be a map of the autonomic nervous system, so it's strongly associated with polyvagal theory, and I was taught it with polyvagal theory in mind. And as I came to use it, I came to realize that actually the window of tolerance, it represents several things, but it actually doesn't map out the autonomic nervous system particularly well. Lots of people have tried to use it as a way of mapping the autonomic nervous system to tie it back to polyvagal theory. And there must be 20 or 30 different maps that people have drawn out there using the window of tolerance. They're all variations on a theme, and none of them actually capture human experience. What they capture is traumatized human experience, which is only a small fraction. If we were all walking around simply mapping out onto that single sheet of paper, we'd all be in a lot of trouble. But we don't. As I say, we're multidimensional. So what the window of tolerance does is it maps out how we use energy. It maps out our capacity to use energy and which energy bands we are kind of locked into a little bit. So when you are fully resourced and feel resilient enough and feel that you're in control enough and that the world is safe enough, then, as I say, you're multidimensional. You can go downhill skiing and get your heartbeat up to over 200 beats a minute, and that's perfectly okay. You'll feel pretty good. And you can do free diving where you get your heart rate down to 30 beats a minute and you're holding your breath for 4 or 5 minutes and going down to maybe 200 meters deep in the water, and you feel pretty good. And you can do all kinds of other things. Now, there's also emergency zones, kind of top and bottom, and so you've got the fight flight, which everyone knows about, which is high energy, and you've got the kind of more sort of switched off opioid range, which is kind of where the body sort of goes into hibernation. And so anyway, I was describing this multiple times, And I came to realize that actually the most important part of the whole thing wasn't so much polyvagal theory. After all, that is about neurology. And we live in a rather strange culture. If I start to say to someone, oh, this is to do with your kind of cingulate gyrus, or there's something going on with your amygdala, and that you see their eyes light up and they go, oh, right, yes, and they get really interested, as if knowing something about brain anatomy actually tells them anything useful. And the fact is, it doesn't. It tells you absolutely nothing at all. When I was growing up, I was in a youth club, and the gaffer of the place, so we're going back 50 years now, he used to sort of say BBB, which means bullshit baffles brains, which was his kind of little kind of way of saying, if you talk in fancy jargon, then people think they understand what is happening, and this is what's going on really in a lot of things that we're presented with. So there's a lot talked about neurology, and actually it doesn't really mean very much. You can't change the way your amygdala work. There's a lot talked about calming the vagus nerve and whatever, and hacking the vagus nerve and vagus nerve this and vagus nerve that, as if that is the be all and end all, and relaxation is everything. Okay, so if it was only the vagus nerve, okay, and nothing else, and you got to 100% vagal activity, then okay, this would be me playing football. Okay, can't get very far there. This would be me making love. This would be me, I don't know, going on a really nice holiday. So, or going to work or whatever. So we need to be energized. Okay, we need to be energized in order to access this multidimensionality. So the whole point of the body is there is this balance which goes on. Now, one of the points of the window of tolerance is that one of the things it demonstrates is that we live as organisms, we're polarized. And if you look at single cells, they're quite interesting in that biologically they actually exhibit most of the potential responses that humans do, apart from being able to make iPhones and stuff like that. Actually, the behavior of a single cell is not that different from the behavior of a human if you start to look at it in terms of polarities. And so they go towards what they're interested in. They withdraw. They communicate with each other, and so your whole biology is based on polarities, and this is really important because there are actually only two responses that we have to the world. One is to get more energized and to kind of have more energy and so respond, and that's essentially through movement. Or the term is vegetate. So this is where we kind of more go inwards and sort of conserve energy and repair ourselves. These are the two fundamental responses. And how this is controlled is very much to do with how we place attention. Okay. And one of the reasons for that is that essentially I'm reducing a whole kind of days or even a whole weekend's workshop here into a small number of minutes. So having to cut a few things out. But essentially, the body is not a single organism in the way that it's thought of. There is intelligence at all levels there, and every single cell has an intelligence of its own. There are some really interesting research papers and also research that's PhD level research, and which has been put up online so you can freely access it, which actually demonstrates this. So single cells, can be seen moving around, making decisions or whatever. And so, all of the cells in your body, every single, even the organelles of the cells, if you look at what they have to do, it's very difficult to explain how they do it unless you invoke some level of conscious decision making. Obviously, they don't have the central nervous system, but nevertheless, there's some level of consciousness. So there are all these layers of consciousness within the body. And so the body works there's sort of a hierarchical relationship in that there are higher levels of organization, and then there are intermediate and lower and lower levels of organization until you get down to things like the Krebs cycle and so on. And in order for this to all work efficiently, there has to be information passed from the top end to the bottom end, and from the bottom end to the top end. And it's exactly the same as a large kind of multinational corporation. There has to be this quality of communication going in both directions, otherwise something stops working. So, and it's the same for kind of responsibility for doing things. So, if you get sort of the managing director of whatever, IBM or something like that, then that person doesn't need to know exactly what the cleaners are doing. All that he needs to know is that there is cleaning going on, okay? And also, it wouldn't really work if they went into the corridor and grabbed hold of a brush and started to show the cleaners how to do it. That just kind of wouldn't go down very well. It also wouldn't work because they would have the expertise for doing that. He wouldn't have a clue how to run the brush. So it's exactly the same with the body. There are ways in which it organizes itself, and each layer of your body, or each part is the wrong word because it implies something more like a car, and these things are all integrated. They've grown into themselves and amongst themselves and within themselves. And there is a total integration between the different, what we call systems and parts of the body, and it's there are communication channels in all sorts of interesting ways. So the way this works is one bit starts to do something, and because it's doing something, it sends out a certain signal, and then another bit. Or it might be like this: a bit up here starts to do something, and then a bit down here goes, oh, that's interesting. And then it goes, oh, well, I better pick up on that because that's really useful. And then because it's doing that down here, then something over here goes, oh, right. And then there's a conversation joins, and then it starts to go, well, I can't quite do that. I've got to do this. So then this picks that up and it bounces back. So there are all these cross communications going on all the time. And at the top end of this is conscious cognitive attention. Okay. And the reason for that is that, it's your conscious cognitive attention that is actually walking around and making decisions all the time. And that actually has access to the senses, not just the sensory system, but the meaning-making part of the sensory system. So when you look at your world, then not only is there sensory information in the way that we think of sensors as you would find, say, on a computer or whatever. That is not a good analogy for how living things work. Yes, there are sensors, but they are all integrated in many, many different ways. So to give you a few examples, yes, so your hearing. Okay, now, if you talk about hearing, people say, oh yeah, the hearing sense, okay, that's through the ears. Well, kind of, not really. If you hear very, very low level vibration, actually that is sensed in the whole body, the body cavities. So there's a vibration inside the body, so once you get to that really low frequency, you're starting to get into rhythm. Okay, the very low frequencies start to get into rhythm, and you experience rhythm through the whole body, and particularly the internal organs and cavities. They actually vibrate. If you get primitive fish, there is a line of lateral line pressure sensors is how they detect changes in pressure in the sea around them. So that's how they know if there's something else swimming nearby. Okay. And so we still have remnant lateral line pressure sensors. So we still detect these sort of more subtle changes in pressure through the sides of the body. And the top lateral line pressure sensor is what we call the ear. And that's modified and has evolved to be much more versatile. Now, the ear connects to the bones of the skull, and so there is also this conduction of sound through into the ear from the skull. So your body actually hears through these 3 or 4 different ways, and then that is integrated into a total experience of sound. And you get similar things with vision. So for instance, the spatial content of vision. With sound also has a direction, doesn't it? This is what I was wanting to say. Sound also has a direction. Now, that is direction and spatial awareness, even if it comes through sound or touch, is processed through the visual cortex. So there is this integration of different parts of what we call the sensory system in ways that actually mean the whole lot is kind of all integrated together. So once you've got that is that's still raw information. And then there has to be some meaning. Now, let's put the slides up. If I can just do the screen share. Because the way that the meaning is organized is the way that the meaning is organized is based on our evolved nervous system. Now, obviously, we've evolved for something like 4 billion years, and a lot of that evolution was as single-celled organisms because it took a long time to get a sufficiently robust single cell that could survive everything that was thrown at it, and reproduce and do everything that it needed to do in order to then get more complex. So a lot of our evolution is actually a single cell. This is a big part of our genetic memory. Now, as human beings, we've our culture is a little bit strange on this, because the way that it's talked about or the way that it's inferred is almost magical. It's almost like once there were no humans and then suddenly there were, and somehow modern humans have a bigger brain and more than humans who were however long ago, simply because they didn't have the same technology. Well, this is actually madness. This is really crazy. We evolved as primates over several million years, and we were hunter-gatherers and wandering around on plains in Africa, or as you see in the picture, or across Asia and so on, for probably 2 to 3 million years, right up to very, very recently, sort of maybe 20,000 years ago. Most humans actually were living in small bands of small family groups who were wandering around in a fundamentally prolific environment. And I had quite an interesting little chat on Facebook a couple of days ago with Cindy Engel. She's she wrote a really interesting book on animal self-healing quite a long time ago, and she's done something else on recently on a very similar topic to the one I'm talking about. But she used to be a nature film producer, and she was saying that in order to sell the films, the companies that distribute them want there to be some excitement. So what they do, if you're going to show a nature film, there's always got to be some bit where a predator takes down an animal. You know, you've got a bit of death and excitement, and it makes the whole thing more saleable. Now, if you have a look at all the zebra and all the other animals on there, are they panicking? You know, no, they're not. And, you know, there's very good reasons for that, in that it's not actually possible for an ecosystem to sustain a large number of predators, such to the extent that you would have to hide behind the bush quaking at every moment of the day. That is just not the case. So predators can only exist in relatively small numbers in any ecosystem. So every ecosystem is actually relatively safe. And so if you get a hunter-gatherer in a modern situation, say the San Bushmen in around the Kalahari or whatever, yeah, the whole situation has actually been changed because of modern human intervention. So the big cattle fences that have been put right across Africa that have stopped migration, they've made things difficult. All kinds of changes in the modern world, but fundamentally they're still it's still the same environment. You still have a few kind of predators around, and you know, the most of the world, essentially, hunter-gatherers are walking around in a world where if they go to sleep, then yes, it's dangerous. So if they had iPhones, that would be, all the ones with iPhones would actually die off, because they wouldn't be able to pay sufficient attention to the world that they are in order to survive. So attention is, from the point of an evolutionary point of view, is really important. You have to pay attention to your environment. And so this is one of the things that's happened in our world, which has caused a lot of trouble, because what's happened is there's information overload, there is sensory overload, and also there's actually a lot of numbness for various reasons. And then so people then go to high sensory overload activities because that's the only way that they can feel like the senses are receiving something. So and then it kind of gets even worse. So most people will walk into a room and not pay attention to any of the detail, because they are actually they're working on automatic. Now, actually, if you were a hunter-gatherer, you wouldn't survive more than a few weeks if you were in that state. You have to pay attention. However, most of the environment that you're in is not only safe and benign, it's actually provides everything that you need to keep yourself alive. So most of your attention is going, hey, what is here that I can eat? What's here that I can use? And it's all there. If you have a dog, you know this, because you take the dog for a walk, and what does the dog do? If there's another dog it's not sure about, yes, it goes into sort of startle alert, and it goes really rigid, and it works out whether this is okay, and all its attention is on that other dog. But then as soon as all that little kind of to-fro and sort of doggy communication thing is all sorted out, then it's back to kind of sniffing and being interested. So wagging its tail and really curious. And it will go and explore, and it's looking for kind of old pasties that have been thrown away a couple of weeks ago. They're great. And if it finds one, then it will go back to the same spot for the next few months, hoping there's another one. You know, this is pretty much the same behavior and use of the senses that you would have had when you were a hunter-gatherer several generations ago. So your nervous system has evolved to be used in this way, which means actually paying a little bit more attention to your environment and being interested and expecting good stuff, and having to be slightly alert because there are a few dangers, few and far between, but there are a few, but actually they're not there all the time. Most of it's good stuff. So use of the senses is tied into all sorts of other interesting things like expectation. Now, if you're walking around expecting the world to be dangerous, then the senses actually work in a very different way. The kind of observation changes, the type of curiosity changes, and your body's internal physiology changes, because your body will go onto alert. It will be expecting you to be kind of either have to run for your life or fight for your life or be badly bitten. So its immune system will have to respond in a way that, for infected bite wounds, so everything changes. So attention is tied to expectation, is tied to the degree of engagement with the world. Now, most people walking around will go into a room and actually they allow their subconscious to take in all the detail, and therefore they don't even very often know like what color the walls are or whether there's a carpet or not, or they can go into a room, sit there for a few hours, leave it again, and not be able to recount any detail that's in there. Whereas if you took your pet dog in there, then the dog would actually the dog has a much healthier quality of attention. The dog would know details about everyone else who was in there, what had been dropped on the floor a couple of weeks ago, what's behind the sofa. Maybe you wouldn't want to go into that level of detail, but nevertheless, that is a lot healthier. Now, there's a guy called Ian McGilchrist, which again, possibly quite a few of you have heard of. He's a very interesting guy. He started off he studied the history of art, and he's one of these polymaths. He's a brilliant bloke. So as soon as he'd finished his degree, and he did a PhD, and then he became a Don, I think, at Oxford. I hope I've not got that right. Hope it wasn't Cambridge, but anyway. So anyway, he started doing his kind of he was looking at the most amazing, emotionally moving pieces of art, and he realized that he could apply his academic skills to those and dissect them and determine what it was that made them so special. But then once he'd finished that process, he was looking at something that was as dry as snuff and had no emotive content whatsoever. It was so he realized actually this was something really special about how his brain worked. So he then gave up his academic career as an art historian, trained as a doctor. He did the full medical degree, then trained as a neurologist, and he specialized in the divided brain. And he's written some really interesting books recently, including one called The Master and His Emissary. And it's all about how the left and the right brain have got different functions. So essentially, if you're going around expecting danger, then you are in one side of your brain. And if you're going around exploring and you're curious and interested, and this is all a new environment, you're in another side of your brain. And I'll sort of just go into the details now. So these two sides of the brain are very important. And if you get any organism that's got more than, a few dozen neurons, then those neurons organize themselves into they become bilateral and asymmetric, which you remember me saying how even cells have a consciousness. So even organisms that have only a few dozen neurons as a central nervous system still organize themselves asymmetrically, bilaterally, which kind of suggests that this form of seeing is continuous, not just for humans, but all the way down the phylogenetic tree down to these kind of little nematodes and whatever. So what happens is the left brain is how we categorize the world. It's how we use the world as a tool and make use of it and exploit it. So in order to do that, we have to put it into kind of little boxes. And it's very much to do with memory as well. So we recognize things and we go, okay, I know what that is. So now I know what I can do with it. Okay. And this allows us to abstract something. So I know this is a pen. And the thing is, there are a zillion different designs of pen. There are certain characteristics of them. They all have a little pointy end, which has got ink in it, and they've got an ink reservoir, and there's some way that you can hold them. So they're all a particular size, and they tend to be a similar shape. So you can look at a pen, and you don't even need to go through that analytical or whatever. You can just look at one and you go, that's a pen. Okay. So that's an extremely useful thing to do. Same with corkscrews. There must be, again, thousands of different designs for bottle corkscrews, and we can kind of look at a corkscrew and you know what it does and whatever. So, and a house and a carpet, these are all ways that we categorize the world. It's a tree, okay? So there are maybe tens of thousands of different species of tree, and yet we look at something and we go, that's a tree. Now, if you think about it, then as soon as you name something like that in that abstracted way, okay, it's a table, it's a chair, it's a tree, there's this really subtle but nevertheless present switching off of interest. And it's almost like as soon as we label something, we're using our left brain and we put it in a box, there is a loss of interest in any further detail because we know what it is, it's perfectly safe. We know that we don't want to do anything with it at this present moment, so it's just put into the background as something you can ignore. And so the naming of something is a very powerful thing. It allows us to identify it, and at the same time, it allows us to ignore it. Now, the right brain is very different. The right brain is actually to do with exploration and finding the new. Now, in order to find the new, you have to pay attention to the detail. And it's only in the detail that you will find that this is not what you thought it was, but it is something different that you haven't seen before. If you don't pay attention to the detail, then it's not possible to find anything new at all. So you'll see children in this kind of exploratory mode, just sort of lying on the grass, looking at all the different stems coming out of the ground and the insects crawling around. There's a teacher of the philosophy of science called Henry Boertoff. He used to live in Norfolk. He's passed on now, but he's written some very interesting books. He was an assistant to David Bohm, who was a quantum physicist who was also himself interested in and a friend of the works of Jiddu Krishnamurti. Okay, now Henry Boertoft essentially describes a Goethean approach to science. So Goethe was a German artist, writer, and scientist in the 18th century, 18th, 19th century. And Goethe, what Goethe did was he said that the human experience is a scientific tool in its own right. If you combine rational material science with the capacity of humans to experience something internally, then you have a new branch of science which basically combines the two. And this is quite an interesting way of looking at things. And actually, this is the way that hunter-gatherers work, because they actually have quite a scientific way of approaching their environment. There have been studies done of this, but a lot of that isn't just kind of making kind of rational judgments based on, going, this is always there and it's always got that color, but also they use their senses and their internal sense of meaning and their internal experience as part of that decision-making process. So you can take that to all sorts of, you can take that to all kinds of levels. Now, the right-hand brain is particularly useful for this because then you start to see things that you haven't seen before. So a good example of this is Galileo. When he first made a telescope and pointed it at Jupiter, then he noticed he wanted to do was map the stars and kind of how they're moving. And so he drew them out and then he pointed it at them the next night. And what he saw was that some of the stars weren't in the same place. They'd moved a bit with Jupiter, but they weren't in the same place they were the night before. That was really confusing. And so another aspect of this kind of right brain attention is that there can be a very uncomfortable unknowings, because you look at something and you realize there's something here that I didn't expect. Now, this is one of the tricky things about modern science, in that it's getting more and more based on what we know, and it's getting less and less good with being uncomfortable about things. And in fact, our whole culture is very much like that. And you see what happens when there is a lack of sense of safety is we tend to drop more into the left brain, because we want to know things. We want to know that we know what's there. And if we're expecting the unknown, that's very, very uncomfortable at all. So our whole culture is gradually sliding more and more into left brain thinking, because that is actually about wanting to be safe. If you're in your left brain, everything is known. And that's it. But it's not very good for science, because then everything has got to remain as known as possible. And actually, that's, there's a lot of things we don't know. So how we use our attention is also tied into kinds of curiosity. And there are these two kinds of curiosity. One is to do with kind of mapping out things that we already know. I call it like a stamp collecting kind of curiosity. So it's possible to be very curious, but actually you're essentially just logging the items as individual items. It's a lot easier to do in a man-made environment, because a man-made environment is full of items that have no intrinsic relationship to each other than the fact that they're put there. Okay, you go in the natural world and things have an intrinsic interrelationship with each other, which is much more how your right brain works. Once you jump into the right brain, and it's possible to notice details which you didn't expect, and so then that starts to make you more aware that there are possibilities that you don't know about, and there's a certain, as I say, discomfort in that. Okay. I could probably keep waffling along like this for a long time, because this is all part of, as I say, this is part of kind of quite a bigger package I teach. And this is all important because our culture actually, as I say, it encourages left brain perception. And what that tends to do is, the more people use that side of the brain, what happens with these feedback loops is that being in danger can increase the level of left brain thinking, because that's how we want to think when we're in danger. And using the left brain more subtly feeds back in through these feedback loops through the nervous system that maybe we're in danger. So there are these two-way conversations happening all the way up and down our organism. And so the one way, or in fact, I think the main way of reversing overwhelm traumatization is actually to start to use the attention in a different way and start to use it in a more exploratory way, and begin to actually take charge of the perception of the environment. Yeah, to cut a very long story short, essentially, we've kind of got internal bodyguards who are running all the time on and wanting to keep us safe. Now, they run on automatic. So if our level of safety is set at whatever, then if your attention to your environment is not interested enough, then even if you're in a completely safe space, those internal bodyguards will not set the safety status lower, because you're not paying the environment sufficient attention for your cognitive mind to take over, so that they'll say, oh, there's new information coming in. So even though you know you're safe, if your attention to the safety is not sufficient, those internal states just stay at the same level. So how we pay attention is actually incredibly important, because this is how our nervous system has evolved, such that the defense alarm systems know that the job's over, that they can relax. And our culture tends to make it so habitually we don't disengage from danger, even though we know the danger's finished, because we're not using our sensual senses and our perception and our attention in the way that the nervous system has evolved for it to be used. The messages don't get back in. So trauma has become cumulative in our culture because of this reason. Okay. All right. So that was a big one. So maybe some questions. What other slides have I got here? I don't know. Oh yeah, there we Bushman family. And yeah, okay. Yeah. So yes, any questions?
Andrew, would you just, if you finish sharing your screen, would you just...
Yes, okay.
Yeah, just come back on, that'd be great. Lovely. Well, thank you very much. That was really interesting. It got me thinking about, I'm art trained as well. So it got me thinking about how images are so important, and how reading signs, you know, come from sensory. So this idea of, this whole body kind of involvement around our understanding, you know, is integral to how we find our meaning and our way in the world. And God, I could go off on that for ages. It's really stimulating, you know.
And as an artist, you see, I mean, I had some really interesting conversations with an artist. I knew a lot of artists when I was working as before I had my present job, I was a hydrogeologist. I was doing sort of engineering and science, and so my perception was trained. So I'd worked in Africa, and so I'd learned how to look at landscape to know how the water was going to be working in the ground by just looking at the surface of the landscape. And so you can train your perception in all kinds of different ways. So I'd just come back to Norfolk, and we were having a walk in the countryside in North Norfolk, and I had my hydrogeologist's eyes on, and and again, you can the history of landscape use actually tells you a lot about where the water is, because villages and mills and the animals, they all depend on water being there, and then the hedge boundaries are related to soil types, so you can actually read all sorts of things. So I had this head on, and then my friend who I was having a walk with was a watercolor artist and stained glass person, and was seeing all of these sort of different, and it was quite an interesting conversation because of the different ways we trained to see the same thing.
So you're reading signs, all the time, but interpreting them from, your own information that you have, which
Yeah.
I think is
But
fascinating.
and you can pick up several different versions. I mean, what I've found with we're working with trauma, actually simple things like, if you get light coming into a room, and most ceilings are painted just white, and you get these wonderful kind of ranges of pastel colors, and they're a great thing to settle in on, because the more they're explored, the more color there is and possibility, which you'll appreciate as an artist, and um, and it's kind of something that's new. It's something that's safe, yeah, and it's something that's neutral, and yet the more you look at it, the more kind of comes out, and so this is so it's a very natural thing. This is what the natural world's like. The more detail you look at, the more there is, and so that's how our nervous system likes to be used somehow.
Yeah, and when you say that, I think there's, because something unexpected is in front of us, it has potential for it to be a wonder, not necessarily scary.
Exactly.
So there's this, we could use the word re-enchantment, isn't it? Because we're seeing,
Yes.
oh, I've never noticed that before. There's this sort of new eyes or something. So there's something that's outside of our normal experience that makes us go, like a rainbow, whoa.
Yeah. And it's that sense of wonder.
Yeah.
And everyone's got used to talking in terms of trauma and danger and safety, and and actually this emphasis is a very modern one. It's very easy to forget. So there's a lot of talk of survival now. That, as a cultural theme, has only been around for about something like 80 years, and before then it wasn't a major theme in kind of conversations and cultural motifs and whatever. So post First World War, and so people, even that recently, had a very, very different way of starting to see the world. The point that they were beginning from actually was extremely different from the one we have now. And now that kind of, all the trauma stuff has become I mean, it's quite ironic, really, because this is where I started off looking at how do I treat trauma, and I realized actually the looking for what's wrong all the time is one of the problems that we have. We're problem solving culture. We want to know what's wrong so we can fix it, and again that feeds into the nervous system. So attention, so it's what you attend to, and so a problem-solving culture attends to what's wrong. So it tends to look for it looks for danger, it looks for, whatever. And that feeds back into the nervous system that it's a dangerous world. So, we're just not using our whole being as it evolved to be used. So there are problems. This is why there are problems. Yeah.
Yeah, so finding the balance with that. So, knowing that that this small wonder could actually make a change, noticing something could bring us hope, could bring hope. It's like, oh, there is something else. It's not just as I see it through the lens that I'm looking through.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, lots to think.
I had a very good friend who she had a very difficult life, really difficult. And I remember her telling me once what had held her together. She was an artist. What had held her together over years was when she washed up, and there were all these rainbows in the bubbles, and that was what she focused on. And that, I know, it's the small stuff,
It really is.
And
Yeah.
do we do kind of questions from the
We can do.
audience,
So
or?
we're running out of time anyway. So if anyone does have a question for Andrew, would they put that in the chat? That would be great.
Okay.
So
I'll just look at my little list of Yeah. So the other, okay, if there's no questions coming up. So there's all kinds of things I could talk about. There's the senses. Oh, titles of the books you mentioned. All right, okay. Well, that's on the chat. The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist is one of them, and if you look up Cindy Engel, CIN, I'll type it. Yes, so she wrote a book quite a long time ago about animal self-medication. So really interesting things, how chimpanzees have a lot of they could have a lot of trouble with parasites, but what they do is they eat certain plants, which if they ate them in even slightly higher doses, they would kill them. So they eat them at the level of near toxicity, and they eat them also in order to get rid of parasites. You've actually, the parasites have a double. You've got to eat it over the whole lifespan of the parasite. You've got to hit it, and then you've got to hit the eggs when they hatch on the next lot. And so they actually do this, and you kind of go, okay, Cindy Engel, Engel. So they actually do this in a way that kills the parasite off. They choose the right plant, they eat it at the right time. And it actually, this is really interesting because, obviously they've not done scientific investigations of this or whatever. They've worked it out. How did they work it out? This is not something that they could work out by trial and error. It isn't. So essentially, they've worked it out by feeling the response of their body, and by being able to sense the effect of the plant, either by taking little bits in or even just holding it or looking at it, putting it in your mouth. And you can, this is quite interesting. The senses actually can do all kinds of really interesting things if you start to put your attention in that direction. And yes, there's a lot more information can come through the senses, and there's a lot more senses available than most people think.
Could you say that the chimps are having a relationship with the parasite? There's something around how they're living alongside each other.
That's another issue altogether.
All right, okay.
Okay, because yes, well,
there's a knowing, isn't there, somewhere?
Well, there's one aspect. Well, no, they're killing the parasites off by taking these herbs in at the right time.
Sure.
But also, it's true that parasites and there are all kinds of organisms which actually we've lived with for millions and millions of years, to the point that the way that our whole body physiology, biochemistry works. We've even stopped carrying certain genes related to immune function, because even things like parasites, actually, we've found, if we have a controllable amount of them, then we don't need to do that ourselves. We can let them do it. So there's literally, we've evolved to be in this ecological balance. So your immune system doesn't kill everything kind of dead. Your immune system tolerates anything up to a certain level, and it goes, yeah, that's fine. If you've got a forest, hey, it's okay having a few rats in here, it's no problem. It's only when they get out of control, then there's something needs to be done. So the immune system works by managing the levels so that they're within this kind of band of ecological appropriateness for the whole organism, rather than just trying to kill things off. Killing things off is a very kind of colonial sort of approach, which Yes.
Yeah, that's a whole other
Anyway,
topic.
yeah.
Yeah, so we're at 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock on the dot. Yes.
Oh, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really fascinating talk. And yeah, we're going to welcome you back in September. Hopefully, yeah, for another talk, which we'll look forward to.
Okay. Yes, there's that next one will follow on more or less from what I've been saying here.
Fantastic.
And yeah, that's great.
Good. That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a very enjoyable conversation and enlightening. Yeah. Okay.
Nice to
All
meet
the
you, Matt.
best.
Okay.
Yeah. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.